Incompetent people surround me wherever I go, and I wish it wasn't out of line to tell them so. The waiter never seems to get my order right. Seems like I got to complain almost every night. How much longer can I take this abuse? I try to be nice, but what's the use when I'm the only one that does anything right? Sometimes it seems like the world is run by chimpanzees, even though some of them might come with college degrees. It's getting hard to separate the facts from fiction, but I think I can say with obvious conviction that in this old world, everybody's wrong but me.
Welcome to Uncommon Sense, the show where sense matters more than dollars and truth matters more than political correctness. I'm your host, Charlotte Laws, and today we're going to be discussing a city that now requires payment for police services, the possible government bailout of the big three auto companies, the increasing threat of pirates, and how animals align themselves with the Earth's magnetic field, among other topics. But first, I want to introduce my esteemed panelist. I have my husband here, who is an Englishman and an Oxford graduate and an attorney and a mediator. And Charles Parselle is his name. Welcome to the show.
Ain't you sweet? Enchanted.
So I thought, we've never done a show, the two of us, and I thought it would be fun to see how this goes with just two of us here. So I thought we would just jump into the first topic, which has to do with the Riverside City Council.
Right.
And they recently passed an ordinance in which businesses, if they use too many police services, they're required to pay for them. So in other words, if a call is made to the police department and more than 3 officers show up, then the business is going to be billed for that service. Or if they use more than, more than 2 calls per month or more than 3 calls per 90 days. And so what do you think of this idea of charging businesses for police services?
I think it's probably very necessary. You have a limited number of police and they have to be used wisely. The way to help ensure that people use any service wisely is to, up to a point, charge them for it. So it's simply a way of getting people not to call on any pretext.
Well, I think it's a terrible idea. And the reason, there are a lot of reasons why I think it's a bad idea. One is when you make a phone call. Now, you may remember years ago, because it was you, that I was with you, and there was a man who wandered out of this mental hospital in Valley Village, North Hollywood area, and he was in a hospital gown. He was from the mental part of the hospital area, and he was naked in the back, and he was wandering down the street. So we called the police, you may remember this, and there were at least 10 or 20 officers who showed up. So of course, a business who calls the police department is not going to have any control over how many officers show up, and yet they're going to be charged if more than 3 show up. That's the first thing.
Well, no. Okay, so let me put the contrary example. There are, let's say, 10 squad cars on duty, and they get 100 calls. They can't respond to all the calls. There has to be some way of screening the calls. This is a way of saying, call us if you really need us. Now, and I'm sure that, I hope, they have built in some sentences that say, if you're calling as a public service, then, call. There has to be some way of screening.
I think it's going to dissuade calls, and they also have a Denny's parking lot in Riverside.
Sure, but let's say the available police are responding to 5 unnecessary calls, and then there's something really deadly happens, and there are no police. There's no one to respond to it.
Well, it's obviously not unnecessary if they were called. I can understand if you're making prank calls. I can understand being charged for that.
So you're making this your argument. if they were called, that means it's necessary. No. People, well, we certainly don't find that in the article of going to doctors, do we? If it's a free service, people will tend to use it very liberally. You have to have some way of, policing
Well, they
or
put it
disciplining the manner in which people use a service. It's never going to be ideal, Charlotte, but it's certainly an acceptable way of doing it.
They put it in place because they wanted businesses to hire their own security officers rather than using the police. But for example, there's a Denny's parking lot in that area, and they've had 164 calls to this Denny's parking lot in the past year. But Denny's is not doing anything to encourage bad behavior, as far as I would know. There are vacant lots in various parts of cities, and I know of one in Oakland where people would do drag racing. The owner doesn't have any control over who shows up. Do you expect the owner to hire security guards to guard a vacant lot because people keep showing up? It's the police's job to handle it. Business people shouldn't be penalized when it's the police's job.
I agree, but I never said that that anyone has to make a phone call vis-a-vis a vacant lot. No,
that's part of it, though. I mean, anybody that if you own that property, then you're going to be penalized for that because you're not providing the proper security. That's the whole argument.
It's not a penalty to keep your properties. And
I also think it dissuades businesses from going into high crime areas.
I couldn't agree with you there.
And establishing themselves. So.
Well, okay. On to the next topic.
The next topic has to do with cattle. And if you go onto Google Earth, you'll see that there are 308 large pastures, and you'll see that the cattle align themselves with the Earth's magnetic field. And they're always pointing north or south. And there are lots of other animals who also seem to react to the Earth's magnetic field. Now, you told me earlier that you know all about this topic. So tell me about this topic, Mr. Parselle.
Well, I certainly know about it with respect to birds, because birds fly over the trackless ocean vast distances. They have some method of aligning themselves, which is thought to be really, some molecules of magnetic substance in their heads. Otherwise, they'd never find their way. As for cattle, I think the reason for that is they don't want the sun in their eyes.
No, I think there are probably health benefits. And I think that, it's interesting, too, they found out that people who sleep, and people don't do this because don't seem to be in sync with this, maybe like many animals are, but people who sleep north-south actually have better sleep. It's better REM sleep and better deep sleep. And I checked our bed. I got a compass out yesterday, and we're almost north-south. We're almost facing north. So that's the good news. We just need to turn slightly.
When I heard that, I was tremendously reassured. But I've always, I think, naturally managed to align myself north-south. Yeah, because I feel it's helpful. Is that the whole topic?
That's the topic there.
Fascinating.
The next one has to do with the auto industry, and this is the big news that's been on cable news for days now. The auto industry yesterday was in front of the Senate Banking Committee, and today they're in front of the House Financial Services Committee, the big three auto companies. And a week ago, as you know, they took corporate jets into Washington, D.C., and they asked for $25 billion, of which they got a lot of criticism for bringing in their corporate jets. So this time they decided to drive from Detroit 500 miles in their hybrid vehicles, and they showed up, and now they want $34 billion.
I know. Well, I'm just praying that they don't hitchhike.
If they walk, they're going to want $200 billion.
I know. So
yes.
Can we say, please return to your corporate jets, take less money?
Well, experts have said they're probably going to be coming back for more, and they're going to need $75 billion to $125 billion in the end. What do you think about this? Do you think we should be bailing out the auto industry?
Well, it's interesting to me that everyone sticks very firmly to that particular verb, bailing out, or no one wants to say what it would really amount to, which is a nationalization of the industry. Because the government's taking it over, in effect. And it's true, once you lend them 34 billion or 25 billion, whatever it is, yes, nothing to stop them coming back for more in 6 months' time. Exactly the same thing happened in UK, I believe, with a company called BlackRock.
Well, I think it's a psychological tactic. You get somebody invested in you with some sum of money, and you come back and say, oh, we're going to fail, and you're going to lose your investment if you don't give us more. So I think that some people actually make it as a tactical move to start out asking for, some kind of assistance that way. I mean, I'm not saying that's what they're doing, but I think it's possible that could be the tactic. But they're saying that we're going to lose 3 million jobs, that 1 out of every 10 jobs is dependent on the auto industry, that we would move from a recession to a depression if we don't give this money, if we don't provide these loans to the auto industry. But 61% of the people in this country are against assisting them.
Right, so that means 61, means 39% are in favor.
Well, 36% are support it, and the other people probably have no opinion.
they don't know. Which I'm in that category of really don't know, because it's such a complicated question. Because it may. So, what do you think? If the auto industry it's not the auto industry, it's the Detroit auto industry.
Right.
It's not Toyota,
That's
Honda,
true. That's true.
BMW, Mercedes, and all those companies which are here in this country. They have their own manufacturing plants here. They happen to be of foreign origin.
Right.
Apparently doing okay. They're not asking for this big bailout amount.
Right.
So
their pay is lower. They pay like $40-something per hour to employees, as opposed to, I believe, $60 per hour for the big three. So they have higher wages.
Yeah, you have special
higher costs.
Yeah, and Detroit is.
And more hours to build a vehicle too. Quite a few more hours to put together one of these vehicles of the big three, as opposed to Toyota or a Nissan or one of the other.
I know it's a very complicated problem. So now this isn't a failure that has occurred in the last 6 months or a year. This is a failure that was being talked about 25, 30 years ago.
Exactly.
It's a long,
and if they can't
decline.
succeed in a good market, which we've had a very strong economy up until recently, then why should we be bailing them out in a bad economy? I mean, people have been complaining about the way they've done things for a long time.
You already gave the reason, didn't you? The reason that's being thought about is that, 1, the country slips into a into a depression. 2, more than 750,000, 750,000 people rely on GM for their pensions, and a huge number of people rely on them for health services. So, in a sense, GM is sort of a quasi-public. The big three are kind of quasi-public institutions, aren't they? It's not that easy. It's not, should we let them fail?
Well, I think that Chapter 11, letting them go into Chapter 11 is just a reorganization, and I think that's a fine way to go, personally. I think that's going to, I don't think it's a big disaster like people think. I think it's going to be, it's a way to reorganize. I think that they're still going to emerge. Some of their products are still going to stay around or emerge in different ways. And hopefully they'll get into green technology, which is where I think our country needs to go.
So this is to say the government we will nationalize you, or we'll give you huge sums of money, provided you run your auto companies the way we say, the way we, Congress, say. But what evidence is there that Congress would be any better at running an auto company than these than the big three in Detroit? This is just like pushing one's own agenda, isn't it? Which you can do if you want to nationalize it. If you say we're taking it over.
Well, you, for example, have always talked about how America's on its decline.
Oh, I haven't said that, Charlotte.
You've said that many times.
No, I have not, Charlotte.
That we were a superpower and now we're on our way down.
No, okay, let me correct you. What I said.
You've said that 1,000 times.
No, I have not said it 1,000 times. What I said is what is obvious, which is that in 1945, after World War II, the United States emerged literally as the producer of the world, with 50% of everything. Well, the US is only 3% of the world's population, so that massive preponderance had to slip over time. And so don't ever say that I said the US is in decline. I just strongly object to you saying that on TV or at all.
Okay, it's flipped. Now, could it get itself back up with a green technology? If we become the leaders in the world in green technology, would that be enough to boost us up to, get us back up on our feet again, since we've slipped and fallen, I guess, a little bit?
No.
Stumbled.
No, that was a historically unique situation. The whole world was prostrate, except the United States, which was dominant to the extent of 50%. That could never be maintained, and it wouldn't be desirable for it to be maintained. So this question of, how adjustments are made in the world actually were handled brilliantly by the United States, unprecedented in history of the world, helping Japan and Germany, the two major antagonists of World War II, helping them to regain their industrial strength. And then Europe followed Germany, and now Europe has become, which had prostrate in 1945, has become, an economic powerhouse. Yeah, and now as a result, to some extent, of Richard Nixon's, paving the way, opening up diplomatic relations with China and trade relations. Now China is becoming its great economic powerhouse. Do you want that all to go away? No, it's ridiculous. The United States, has a particular problem, but it doesn't have to become the United States of 1945, 1946. No one wants those days back again. So don't ever misrepresent me, especially not on TV.
I'm not misrepresenting. That's what you said. What do you think about this theory that we need to keep various industries alive so that we can be more self-sufficient, and that if we let the three auto companies go down, that we aren't going to be as self-sufficient?
But
because now
we?
The country won't be as self-sufficient because we're relying upon products that are basically coming from other countries like Japan, et cetera.
Of course, but hang on. What you say, if we let them go, but they are the automakers. They are the many thousands of workers and management.
No, I mean,
there is no we. What's a we?
Well, if we don't prop them up, is what I'm saying. If the country, the taxpayers don't prop up these companies by bailing them out, I know you don't like that word, but whatever term you want to use, would that make us more dependent upon other nations, because we wouldn't have our own car manufacturers that stem from this country? I mean, those other automakers, Toyota could decide they don't want to make products in the United States anymore and pull them out and produce the vehicles elsewhere, and we wouldn't have those workers with those jobs and that product coming from the United States. And we could get behind in auto technology. I don't know. I'm just asking a question.
Well, I've owned various vehicles in the past, including I owned a car called a Moskvich, which was made in Russia.
I've never even heard of that.
You never have? I don't think they make them anymore. Actually,
I'm sure they don't. I've never heard of it.
I also owned a motorbike made in Czechoslovakia, as it then was, which was when it was a communist country. So obviously the Russians felt they needed a domestic auto manufacturer. It wasn't that successful. This question of being self-sufficient, however, is really greatly overblown. And the reason that it's overblown in the United States is because the United States is a continental-sized country, huge country, that used to be self-sufficient, particularly in oil. In fact, it was the world's biggest oil producer, but it is no longer. Mm-hmm. So lots of countries are not and can never be self-sufficient. For example, China can never be self-sufficient in oil, doesn't have it. Japanese don't have any oil. The Indians don't have any oil. Mm-hmm. They're not, beating their breasts about not having any oil. They're just, they're producing other things.
Right.
Every country, needs to adjust itself to the realities. There's no oil in France. Mm-hmm. They're doing okay. There's no oil in Germany, for goodness sake. Mm-hmm. Germany's a powerhouse of Europe. So this idea of being self-sufficient...
It's just better to look at it that we're a world economy and it's a global situation, and it's not really an issue. Well, the next topic has to do with cameras that can actually phone home. You can get a memory card. It's about $100. And you put this in pretty much any digital camera. And if you lose your camera, it gets stolen, it actually can contact you. And there was a family vacationing in Florida, and their camera was stolen. And it had this memory card in it, so it would send back to their computer back at their home. It sent all the photos that had been in their camera, including pictures of the guys who had stolen their camera. and then also with the Mac computers, which I know you have a Mac computer, you can put a device like this in the computer, and this man set up a camera in addition to the computer because food kept disappearing from his refrigerator, and he didn't know why. So he set up this camera, he goes to work, and the video is sent to his office, and it turned out there was this girl who had been living in his closet who had been stealing food while he was at work. I mean, it's pretty bizarre. But anyway, I thought that was kind of an interesting little story of how technology is moving ahead so that, eventually, your car gets stolen and it phones you and says, "Hi, I'm on 3rd Street. These guys are really kind of scary."
Well, okay, so that's an example of good surveillance, isn't it?
Yeah.
So the question is it worth it given the cost? But for that is surveillance. So being put to a good purpose, it can equally be put to a bad purpose. So people who now say, "What a wonderful thing if your camera, phones home," don't like the idea of someone else doing it to you. Say that it's a want of privacy, isn't it? Privacy.
Exactly.
Yeah. So you could be surveyed. The British are now complaining that they're the most surveyed
Oh yeah, there are
country
cameras
in the
on
world.
like every corner now.
So the question is it worth it? Everything's a trade-off, isn't it?
Right.
On the one hand, you catch the bad guys. On the other hand, you can get caught yourself.
Right.
So everyone wants privacy for themselves. They assume that they're the good guy, and they want the bad guys to be caught. All it shows is that everything is two-edged.
Right. Well, there are pirates in the news quite a bit lately, and there are a lot of ships that are being taken over by pirates.
Right.
And even a cruise liner with many people on board, 684 passengers, had to try to outrun a pirate ship. The pirates are getting more and more bold. And this year there have been 92 ships attacked. There have been 26 ships hijacked. And there are currently 260 crew members who are still, being held as hostages by pirates. And this is mostly on the east coast of Africa off Somalia. And what do you think we should do about this? It's a big problem, and there's not much that can be done about it at this point.
Well, there's lots of things can be done about it. It'd be a very easy problem to solve.
Well, the UN Security Council resolution says that no one is allowed to do anything except Somalia. I mean, that's what it actually states in there. So other countries like the United States really are prohibited from this international treaty or whatever, this resolution. They're not allowed to go after the pirates. I think you should be able to put weaponry on your cruise ship. I mean, put the cannonball there and just lob it on over to the pirates. And you should be able to protect yourself.
See, I'm coughing. One time I had the notion of sailing around the world, and I was to some extent deterred by
pirates?
No, but the idea, if you're in a sailing ship, if you're sailing across, you're completely defenseless. As for privacy, piracy has been happening for a very, very long time. Julius Caesar, when he was a young man, was captured by pirates. I'm sure you remember that.
Of course.
Very soon after the United States won its independence from Great Britain, the US took it into its head, because it was making these heavy cruisers that were very effective, of wiping out the Barbary pirates in the Mediterranean. Those are pirates that would operate off the Barbary coast. So piracy has a very long history. The British were deemed pirates by the Spanish at the time of Elizabeth I. The Spanish would bring their bullion ships back from the New World filled with gold and silver, and the British would try to get their share, so would the Dutch. And so would lots of other people robbing. And so the Spanish thought the British were pirates, and indeed a lot of them were. So now we have a situation of piracy. How could it be hard to solve? Surveillance, planes overhead, fast-moving jets. It would be quite easy. This is like that area off the coast of Somalia, the Arabian Sea. I think it is.
I mean, they're holding like a Russian tanker. They have a Russian ship. They have a Saudi Arabian, tons of oil in some sort of a tanker from Saudi Arabia. So there's some pretty,
I know,
expensive.
No, it's true.
Cargo and ships that they're currently holding. So,
that's true.
And they're also apparently aligning themselves with the, Muslim terrorists now. Is what I've read. I don't know. It's funny how pirates are not considered terrorists, because they don't have this ideology, I guess.
Right,
it's
but
just
we
them.
talk about Islamist terrorists, don't we? We don't talk about Muslim terrorists. We don't presume that Muslims are terrorists. We assume that in that part of the world...
Not all Muslims, of course not.
Not
all Christians are terrorists. Not all Englishmen are terrorists. Not all Americans are terrorists.
Well done, Charlotte. All right, so that was very fine. All I'm saying is that it surely, of all problems that would be easier to solve today than at any time in the last 2,000 years, piracy is the one because of surveillance. It's so easy to do.
Well, I
from
don't know,
the sky.
the waters are so vast. Are you sure it's that easy to do? I mean,
I'm certain
maybe if it's only in the Somalian area,
No,
but if it expands.
No, hang on, let me speak here.
Speak,
It's
sir.
so easy. One, surveillance from satellites, terribly easy. Two, radio. Hello, we're being attacked by a pirate vessel. The position of the ship is right there. Can't be missed. So you know exactly where the ship is. There's absolutely no, once you've got an international force together, you could wipe piracy out right away. If
Right.
Julius Caesar could do it, anyone could. Julius Caesar
You
was
have
good at
cameras
that.
who can phone home. You can get rid of pirates.
Well, what he did was, after the ransom had been paid, he went back with an expeditionary force and wiped out the pirates. I think they picked the wrong guy in Julius Caesar. He was really good at what he did. However, this is a localized problem. Let's move on to the next subject.
Well, they say that Americans have more living space than the Europeans do, for English people or the French or the Italians, and that John Edwards is always, for example, talking about helping the poor and the poor of this country, but indeed the poor of this country on average have 2 TV sets, air conditioning, microwave, and 45% of these people actually own their own home, which is a 3-bedroom house. Is the average size house, and they're not malnourished. In fact, if you look at children of the poor versus children of the wealthy, they get the same kind of calories or the same kind of nourishment. They're not scrawny and malnourished. So do you think that this has just been kind of a politically correct move to put this emphasis on poverty, or do you think this is a really serious problem in our country? Because some are saying that it just has to do with political correctness. I mean, I went to this poverty conference a couple of years ago that was headed up by Maria Shriver, and I think that her heart was definitely in the right place. But this was like a 3-day conference, and the first day was all the politicians and celebrities showed up, so the attendance was very good that day. But the second and third day, I mean, there must have been 20 of us left on the second and third day. Maria Shriver was still there, but nobody, no other celebrities were there, and there were very few people that even seemed to care about the issue. And then at the end of the 3 days, they were supposed to put together a committee to continue to explore the issue, and they basically just put some politicians on the committee.
I think we're running out.
But we're running out of time.
No,
I'm
we'll
sorry,
give you your view. I'm sure it's terribly important.
But we'll do this
What
next
was the
time.
question? Are the poor poor? I think people who don't have a job.
Anyway, I want to thank you so much. Thank you so much for joining us today, and we will see you next time. I hope we brought some uncommon sense into your life.
But where's the music? We're still on TV. I might as well express my view.
No, it's over now.
I think it's a
dear.
terrible thing if you don't have a job, and it's a terrible thing if you lose your house in foreclosure. Whether your house is bigger than the average house in Europe, I think it's not.
Sometimes it seems like the world is run by chimpanzees, even though some of them might come with college degrees. It's getting hard to separate the facts from fiction, but I think I can say with obvious conviction that in this old world, everybody's wrong but me. Everybody's wrong to disagree with me. That really chaps my eye. I thought it all through so very carefully. There's no point even considering the other side. Still, I